Hi, it's Jamie from Evolution 5. This week I've been in the office helping our construction team work on a price activity schedule for an NEC contract. I thought it'd be a really good idea to make a video for contractors or subcontractors working on their first NEC contract and give them a few helpful tips on how to put together a price activity schedule. So let's do a quick introduction to the NEC. The NEC was first published in 1993 and it's abbreviated for the New Engineering Contract. It's a suite of contracts that foster partnering and collaboration between you, the contractor, and the client. The NEC is currently on its fourth edition, i.e. NEC 4. The Engineering and Construction Contract, ECC, is the most frequently adopted and used, and it can be used for highway projects, infrastructure, processing plant, as well as buildings. And it's used for the appointment between the contractor and the client, the employer. It also includes any level of design responsibility on the contractor. So in this video, we're going to focus on the NEC 4 Option A. So let's just quickly cover what is Option A. So Option A is a price contract with an activity schedule that is linked to the construction program and is allocated a price against each activity and is used for interim payment purposes where each activity must be complete. So you as the contractor largely bear the risk of carrying out the work to the agreed prices. The advantage or the beauty of having the price activity schedule is it really simplifies the interim payment process. So how are payments calculated? The activity schedule on these types of projects is submitted with the construction program at the tender stage. The activity schedule under Option A opposed to C is far more important as it has effect on your cash flow as well as timing and payment amounts. The sum owed to you at the assessment period is defined as the total of each group of activities without defects, each activity that's not part of a group, and those activities, they must be complete 100%. So the payment process does not consider part completed activities for payment. So let's look at 5 helpful tips in preparing the price activity schedule to set yourself up for future interim payments. So tip number 1 is around breaking down the activity schedule. It's really important the activity schedule is broken down into granular detail that would enable you to make applications for payment for works completed that ordinarily would not be completed. So what do I mean by that? Let's use an example. Let's talk about site hoarding. At the beginning of the project, when you're establishing the site, in order to secure the site, you may need to install timber hoarding. Now, ordinarily, under other forms of contract where you've got a price schedule, or you may have a contract sum analysis, or even on a program, you'll probably show the activity as site hoarding. But in real terms, with site hoarding, you firstly need to have the materials delivered to site. You then erect the hoarding, and then on completion of the project, you will most probably dismantle the hoarding. Now, if under the NEC price activity schedule, you just have what you'd ordinarily have, which is timber site hoarding, in real terms, you can't apply for that until the end of the project when you are dismantling the hoarding. So therefore, you could look at breaking it down into 2 activities, which would be install the site hoarding, and the second one, dismantle the site hoarding. You can then break up the overall cost for the site hoarding by those 2 activities. Or furthermore, if you wanted to break down even further than that, you could have it as delivery of timber hoarding to site, install timber hoarding, and then dismantle timber hoarding. The point we're trying to get across here is by breaking it down into 3 activities or 2 activities, it means you're actually getting paid for what you do at the time you're undertaking that work. And therefore, you can see from that example, it's really important to not overcomplicate and not be vague on activities and make sure they're really clear and broken down into clear, understandable tasks. So tip 2 is around costing the schedule and making sure everything's included. In reality, during the tender stage, you've probably priced the scope in a sort of BQ format rather than a price activity schedule, which is perfectly normal, or you've probably been given a schedule of works or scope of works to price that doesn't necessarily reflect how you'd actually deliver the work and how you need to get paid. So what we need to do is to disseminate that information into a price activity schedule. The price activity schedule we've talked about, it needs to be clear and concise, and it needs to be activities that are achievable to be completed at 100%. Furthermore, you want to ungroup those activities as we discussed in tip 1. The price activity schedule, whilst there's lots of different formats and ways of doing it, there's really 3 columns that should be in a spreadsheet or a template. And really, I'd like to see these as a activity ID, which we'll talk about in a minute, should align to the program. Activity description, this is really important, as we've discussed, to get this activity description absolutely spot on. And then the amount for that activity. So when it's completed, you can then apply the assessment for 100% of that activity. So tip 3 is around managing cash flow. The putting together the price activity schedule and allocating costs against activities enables you to improve cash flow throughout the project, and certainly in the early stages. There is an opportunity, obviously, for you to be cash positive, but what we really need to focus on, more than making sure we're positive cash flow, is we're not negative cash flow. So we've got to look at a couple of things here. The first thing is making sure that whatever you're producing as your price activity schedule is at the very minimum back to back with your subcontractors that are actually executing the work on site. The second point is around looking at the construction program and making sure that you understand what is due to be carried out in the period leading up to each assessment period or assessment date. It's really important you do this, and it's very much going to be an iterative process by refining the program, refining the activity schedule, and back and forth so you get it absolutely right. But what you want to be doing is looking at the activities that are being carried out in that period, and then looking at what may be partially complete that you may need to make an application, you may need that money for cash flow. So let's just break that down. Think about that as an example. If you're halfway through an activity up to that assessment period, there's nothing wrong with breaking activity down further. So let's take steel frame erection, if you like, or installation of a steel frame. There's nothing stopping you from applying for grid lines A to C or 1 to 3, and then in your next application applying for D to F or D to H or whatever it might be. So you can break the installation down, the long as that description's really clear. So it could be, as I said, installation of steel frame between grid lines A to C or A to D. Nice and clear, nice and concise, and it means you can make an application for completion in that relevant application assessment. So tip 4 is around correctly and thoroughly allocating costs. It's really important that when we're allocating costs that we consider activities. There will be some activities that can never really quite be complete at 100%, or they're just difficult to apply for. Let's take management and site costs, otherwise known as preliminaries under other contracts or generally across the construction industry. When we've got management and staff costs, normally to build that up, we're looking at the duration of the program, we're looking at their effort across the program, so how many days a week, what have you. Site manager, it might be 5 days a week over 52 weeks if it's a year construction program. So that's how we build up the cost. But in terms of the price activity schedule, we now need to distribute that cost against those activities that we break down. There's no real easy way of doing this, but there's a couple of ways we can look at it. So firstly, it's always, in my opinion, it's always easier to break down the activities exclusive of the prelims, unless obviously the prelim items are, like we talked about, site hoarding. But let's just stick with the management labour element of preliminaries to start with. So it's easier to break down the activities, build up the total contract sum minus the management and staff costs, and then apportion them. So there's two ways we can do this. The first way is to look at those activities that are completed month by the assessment period, and then allocate how we built up those management and costs and apportion them across those activities within that assessment period. Or we can do it on a percentage basis. So we can look at the total of all our activities, what they are as a percentage of the total sum of 100%, and then look at our prelim costs and then apportion the total of prelim costs against the relevant percentage, and then add those to the activities that we put in the price schedule. So the last tip number 5, is aligning the priced activity schedule with the project program. We mentioned this a few times before. So you may be using Asta Power Project or Primavera to put together your Gantt chart program. Either way, it's really important that the activity ID used on your programming software lines up with your price activity schedule, and that's assuming you're using 2 different pieces of software to produce the 2 documents. If obviously you're doing it in the programming software, it doesn't apply what I'm saying, but I'm assuming most people will use a programming software and then Excel for the price activity schedule. The next thing is to make sure the activities line up so the descriptions are the same, if indeed possible, but it's really helpful to do that in both documents. And I think I mentioned before, it may take a few iterations to line up how you're going to deliver the project against how you want to be paid for the project. So there will be an iterative process. By not aligning the price activity schedule with the program, you're really putting yourself at risk of negative cash flow. But by aligning the two, not only are you making it easier for the project manager, you're making it easy for people who obviously are reading the 2 documents. That in turn makes it easy for the project manager to assess the works completed to date, and means the whole payment process is a lot easier, which is ultimately why we're talking about putting together a concise and clear price activity schedule. I really hope you found value in this video, and I really hope the tips I've given you today can really set yourself off on your first NEC project and making sure you can put the price activity schedule together and put yourself in a good position for positive cash flow or good cash flow and good application process.